Engaging opening that hooks the audience right away, creating intrigue and emotion. The rain poured down in Charlotte, North Carolina, drumming against the windows of Benny's diner like impatient fingers tapping on glass. It was nearly midnight, and the neon open sign flickered, casting a weak glow onto the empty street. Inside, Jessica Carter, a 30-year-old single mother, wiped down the counter for what felt like the 100th time that night. Her feet ached from standing for 10 hours straight, but exhaustion had become a familiar companion, one she had no choice but to endure. "Mom, can I please go to basketball camp this summer?" Her 8-year-old daughter, Ava, had begged that morning. "Coach says I'm getting really good. Basketball camp cost $500. Jessica had done the math a dozen times. 2 more weeks of double shifts, maybe 3, and she might be able to make it happen. Small blue diamond, before we continue, tell me, what would you do in Jessica's situation? Drop a 1 in the comments if you think she should help no matter what, a 0 if you think she should follow the rules, or just hit that subscribe button if you're not sure. The chime above the door suddenly rang, snapping Jessica out of her thoughts. A tall man stepped inside, shaking off the rain. His hoodie was pulled low over his face, and his baseball cap shadowed his eyes, but even hunched over, he had the kind of towering presence that made people take notice. He moved with quiet confidence, yet something in his posture, the way his shoulders sagged, the deep breath he let out as he scanned the nearly empty diner, told Jessica he wasn't just another late-night customer. He looked drained, like someone carrying the weight of the world. Her manager, Frank Miller, stood behind the counter, already shaking his head. "Kitchen's closed," he barked. Jessica hesitated. Rules are rules. She knew that better than anyone. But something about this man made her pause. He didn't look dangerous. He looked tired, hungry. Before she knew it, the words were out of her mouth. "Go ahead and sit. I'll get you something." Frank turned to her, eyes flashing with anger. "Did you hear what I just said, Carter?" Jessica forced a smile, ignoring the tension prickling at her skin. "I'll be quick. Won't take more than 5 minutes." The man gave her a small, appreciative nod and slid into a booth near the window. Jessica grabbed a menu but didn't bother handing it to him. She already knew what to recommend. "Coffee, black?" she asked, half joking. "Small blue diamond, if you've made it this far, you're hooked. Don't forget to like this video and share it with someone who needs to hear this powerful story. And if you love real-life struggles and stories of perseverance, hit that subscribe button to join the RVM Black Struggles community." He chuckled. "Hello, rich sound. Yeah. And whatever you think is best. Best chicken and waffles in Charlotte," she said, jotting down the order. "My daughter says so, anyway." His lips curved into a small smile. "Good dreams to have." As Jessica turned toward the kitchen, she caught a glimpse of his face under the dim fluorescent light, just for a second, but it was enough. Her stomach clenched. She knew exactly who he was. But instead of gasping, asking for a selfie, or blurting out his name like any basketball fan would, she kept moving. In the corner of the diner, the security camera's red light blinked, recording everything. Outside, a black SUV idled at the curb, its taillights barely visible through the rain. Inside, the man quietly sipped his coffee, unaware that Jessica's simple act of kindness was about to change both of their lives forever. What she didn't know was that someone else had been watching. And by morning, her world would be turned upside down. The morning came too soon. Jessica Carter groggily slapped her alarm off and sat up, the ache in her feet still lingering from last night's shift. But as her mind fully woke up, a rare feeling of relief settled over her. The memory of that $500 tip from the mysterious late-night customer flashed in her mind. She still couldn't believe it. That money meant Ava's basketball camp was finally within reach. She padded barefoot into the kitchen of their tiny apartment, where Ava was already awake, dribbling an imaginary ball in her oversized t-shirt. "Guess what?" Jessica said with a grin, pouring a cup of coffee. Ava spun around, eyes wide. "You found a way to send me to camp?" Jessica laughed. "Maybe. Just maybe." Ava let out a squeal, running to hug her. But the warm moment was short-lived. By 8:45 a.m., Jessica was standing outside Benny's diner, still basking in the afterglow of last night's unexpected generosity. She took a deep breath, ready to power through another shift. She never saw it coming. The moment she walked in, her manager, Frank Miller, was already waiting for her, arms crossed, standing next to his office door. "My office. Now." Jessica's stomach tightened. As soon as she stepped inside, the security footage from last night was already playing on his computer screen. There she was, taking the man's order at 11:47 p.m. Frank didn't look up as he hit pause, freezing the timestamp on the screen. "Want to explain this?" Jessica opened her mouth, but he cut her off. "You know the rules. No customers after 11:30. No exceptions." His voice was sharp, clipped. "He just needed a meal," Jessica said, trying to keep her voice steady. "He wasn't causing trouble." "What if he had?" Frank snapped, slamming his hands on the desk. "What if he was some kind of junkie? Or a criminal? What if something happened while you were alone in here? You think the insurance covers incidents after hours?" Jessica clenched her jaw. "Nothing happened. You're missing the point. You broke the rules. Again." Her stomach dropped. She'd bent the rules before, sneaking extra food to homeless kids, letting an old woman stay a little past closing so she could finish her coffee in peace. But she never thought it would come back to haunt her like this. And now, Frank was done giving her warnings. "You're fired." The words hit like a punch to the gut. Jessica stared at him, barely able to process it. "You're seriously firing me? For feeding a hungry man?" Frank's face was unreadable. "You can pick up your final check in 2 weeks." Jessica's hands trembled as she unpinned her name tag and slammed it onto the desk. 8 years. Just like that. She wanted to scream. To tell him who that man really was. But what difference would it make? Frank wouldn't believe her. So she walked out, without looking back. As she stepped onto the sidewalk, her phone buzzed in her pocket. An unknown number. "Hello?" A professional-sounding woman's voice answered. "Ms. Carter? I'm calling on behalf of Mr. David Johnson. He'd like to meet with you this morning at the Charlotte Hawks executive office. Are you available?" Jessica nearly dropped her phone. She turned, glancing back at Benny's diner, where Frank stood inside, watching her through the window with suspicion. "I guess I am now." Her voice came out steadier than she expected. "What's this about?" The woman's tone remained polite, yet cryptic. "Mr. Johnson will explain everything in person. Can you be here in 30 minutes? Jessica swallowed hard, her pulse quickening. She had no idea what was happening, but deep down, she knew this was no coincidence. Something bigger was in motion. And whatever it was, it had only just begun. This section builds anticipation as Jessica steps into the unknown, creating mystery and a sense of transformation. Jessica drove through the heart of Charlotte, gripping the steering wheel so tightly her knuckles turned white. The towering glass structure of the Charlotte Hawks executive office loomed ahead, far removed from the greasy counters and fluorescent lights of Benny's diner. "What am I even doing here?" She glanced at the $500 tip still sitting in her purse, a stark reminder that last night wasn't just a coincidence. She parked in the visitors section and took a deep breath before stepping out. Inside, the lobby was all marble floors and high ceilings, buzzing with well-dressed professionals who barely acknowledged her presence. A woman in a navy suit approached. "Ms. Carter?" Jessica nodded. "I'm Patricia. Mr. Johnson is expecting you." Patricia led her to a private elevator, swiping a security badge. As the doors closed, Jessica's nerves kicked into overdrive. "Excuse me, but," she hesitated. "Why does David Johnson want to see me?" Patricia smiled, but it didn't answer the question. "You'll find out soon enough." The elevator dinged, and the door slid open to reveal a massive office with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the Charlotte skyline. At a sleek mahogany desk sat David Johnson, basketball legend, billionaire, and one of the most powerful men in the country. But he wasn't reviewing contracts or taking calls. He was waiting. For her. Jessica felt wildly out of place in her worn-out waitress uniform. But when David stood, offering a warm handshake, she was taken aback by how familiar he felt. "Ms. Carter." His voice was the same as last night. Deep. Steady. Kind. She shook his hand, unsure what to say. "I hope the chicken and waffles were good?" David chuckled. "Best I've had in a long time." He gestured toward a chair. "Please, sit." Jessica lowered herself into the plush leather seat, her heart still racing. "I imagine you're wondering why you're here," David began, leaning forward slightly. "That thought crossed my mind," she admitted. David studied her for a moment, then said something that made her breath catch. "I've been watching Benny's diner for a while now. More specifically, I've been watching you." Jessica's entire body stiffened. "Excuse me?" David smiled, sensing her unease. "I don't mean that in a creepy way," he assured her. "I've been visiting small businesses across Charlotte, trying to find someone with real heart. Someone who does the right thing, even when no one is watching." Jessica swallowed. "And? You think that's me?" David leaned back, nodding. "I saw how you treated people. Giving extra food to hungry kids. staying late so an elderly customer could finish her coffee in peace. Most people don't do that when they think no one important is paying attention. Jessica blinked, shocked that anyone had noticed. Last night was the final test, David continued. I needed to see if you'd stick to the rules, or follow your heart. Jessica still wasn't sure where this was going. So, what does that mean? David slid a folder across the desk. Inside was a job offer. A real job. Not as a waitress. Not as a charity case. But as the director of community outreach for the Johnson Youth Foundation. Jessica's hands trembled as she flipped through the pages. The salary was more than triple what she made at the diner. Full benefits. Retirement. And she sucked in a sharp breath. Ava would get full admission to the foundation's basketball training programs. Jessica's mouth went dry. I don't have a college degree, she stammered. I've never run a foundation. I'm just a waitress. David met her gaze. No, you're not. You're exactly what this foundation needs. Jessica stared at him, overwhelmed. This was too much. Too good to be true. I need time to think, she said, clutching the folder to her chest. David smiled. Of course. Take the weekend. Read it over. Talk to your daughter. Jessica slowly rose from her chair, her mind spinning. As she turned to leave, David's voice stopped her. Oh, and Jessica? She looked back. If you take the job, you start Monday. This section dives into Jessica's transition from a struggling waitress to a leadership role, highlighting self-doubt, resistance from others, and the emotional tension of leaving her old life behind. Jessica sat in her car for a long time, staring at the folder in her lap. The words on the cover were simple enough. Johnson Youth Foundation, Employment Agreement. But inside, it felt like something out of a dream. A real salary. Real benefits. A chance for Ava to train with professionals. Yet instead of excitement, Jessica felt something else, fear. Could she actually do this? Run a program? Lead a team? Make decisions that affect hundreds of kids? She had no experience. No business degree. She was just a woman who had spent the last 8 years slinging pancakes and pouring coffee. Her phone buzzed. A text from Ava. Did you figure out camp yet? Love you, Mom. Jessica closed her eyes, gripping the folder tighter. You have to do this. For her. The hard goodbye. The next morning, Jessica walked into Benny's diner one last time. The familiar smell of bacon and coffee hit her like a wave of nostalgia. She had spent nearly a decade here, memorizing every stain on the floor, every regular's order. Her coworker, Maria, nearly dropped a coffee pot when she saw her. Jess. What are you doing here? Frank said you got fired. Jessica swallowed. I came to say goodbye. Maria's smile faded. Oh. Across the diner, some of the regulars noticed her. Mrs. Thompson, the elderly widow who came in every Tuesday, looked heartbroken. Jess, honey, you're leaving? Jessica forced a smile. Yeah. I got a new job. Maria frowned. Where? Jessica hesitated. If she told them who had hired her, they'd never believe it. I'm working for a nonprofit now. Maria raised an eyebrow. Since when do nonprofits pay more than diners? Jessica laughed nervously. It's complicated. Before she could say more, Frank stormed out of his office. You've got a lot of nerve showing up here. Jessica turned to him, surprised. Frank, I just came to say. I don't care. He crossed his arms. You got fired. You don't work here anymore. So why don't you get out before you distract my staff? Jessica felt her stomach twist. She had given 8 years to this place. And Frank couldn't even pretend to care. For a brief moment, the old Jessica wanted to shrink back, to apologize, to make things easier. But the new Jessica? The one who had just been given the opportunity of a lifetime? She squared her shoulders and met Frank's gaze. You know what, Frank? I should be thanking you. Frank blinked. Excuse me? Jessica smiled, not the polite, timid one she used to wear, but a real, self-assured smile. If you hadn't fired me, I never would have realized how much I was worth. Then, without another word, she turned and walked out the door. She didn't look back. Day 1. And disaster strikes. Jessica expected her first day at the Johnson Youth Foundation to be like a fairy tale. It wasn't. She arrived 30 minutes early, determined to make a good impression. But as soon as she stepped into the office, she could feel the tension. The staff, dressed in sharp business attire, glanced at her with skepticism. They knew who she was. And they weren't impressed. A woman with perfectly styled blonde hair and an expensive blazer approached. You must be Jessica Carter, she said, her voice overly polite. Jessica extended a hand. Yes, and you are? Melissa Grant. Director of Corporate Partnerships. Jessica hesitated. The title sounded important. Melissa barely shook her hand before pulling away. Just so we're clear, I don't agree with this decision. David Johnson brought you in without consulting anyone, and I don't see how a former waitress is qualified to run a program of this size. Jessica's stomach clenched. I have a meeting, Melissa interrupted, already turning away. Good luck. Jessica stood there, humiliated, as the other staff members pretended not to stare. The message was clear. They didn't respect her. And worse, they expected her to fail. The first real challenge. By lunchtime, Jessica was drowning. She had been given a stack of reports and emails that might as well have been written in a foreign language. She had back-to-back meetings, where people talked over her like she wasn't even there. Worst of all, she couldn't find David Johnson anywhere. She was completely alone. By 3 p.m., she was ready to walk out. She had never felt more out of place in her life. That's when she heard it. The sound of bouncing basketballs. Jessica followed the noise to a gym inside the foundation's headquarters, where kids were practicing under the watchful eye of professional coaches. Her eyes immediately locked onto Ava. Her daughter was running drills with a focus and intensity Jessica had never seen before. And then, it happened. Ava took a perfect shot. The ball swished through the net flawlessly. The coach nodded approvingly. Nice one, kid. Ava beamed. Jessica felt tears prick her eyes. For the first time that day, she remembered why she was here. Not for the staff. Not for the salary. Not even for David Johnson. She was here for these kids. For the little girl who dreamed of being more than her circumstances. For every child who needed someone to believe in them. Jessica took a deep breath, wiped her tears, and turned away from the court. She had work to do. And she wasn't going anywhere. This is the first major crisis, throwing Jessica into the deep end. She faces betrayal, high stakes, and the risk of losing everything before she even gets started. Jessica spent the next 2 weeks pushing through the doubt and resistance. She was at the office before sunrise and left long after dark. She read every report, attended every meeting, and forced herself to learn everything she could about running a nonprofit. Slowly, things started to shift. The coaches and kids respected her. Parents started warming up to her. Even some staff members begrudgingly admitted she had good instincts. But not Melissa Grant. Melissa still treated her like an outsider, whispering in meetings, planting seeds of doubt among the staff. Jessica ignored it, until one afternoon when everything came crashing down. The email that changed everything. Jessica had just finished reviewing a proposal for an upcoming youth basketball scholarship program when she noticed an email marked urgent in her inbox. The subject line sent chills down her spine. Financial irregularities, need immediate review. Jessica's heart pounded as she clicked it open. Attached was a financial report showing large sums of money being moved between accounts without clear documentation. Hundreds of thousands of dollars. Jessica's blood ran cold. Her first instinct was that it had to be a mistake. But as she dug deeper, the numbers didn't lie. Someone was funneling money through different accounts, making it look like funds were going to youth programs, but they weren't. Jessica's stomach churned. This wasn't just bad accounting. It was fraud. And it was happening inside the Johnson Youth Foundation. The trap springs shut. Jessica raced to David Johnson's office, but his assistant told her he was out of town for a week. She had no choice but to go to the next highest authority in the foundation. Melissa Grant. Jessica burst into her office, slamming the file down on her desk. "We have a problem," she said, trying to keep her voice steady. "There's money missing." Melissa didn't even blink. "I'm aware." Jessica froze. "You, what?" Melissa sighed, folding her hands neatly on the desk. "Jessica, you're new to this world, so let me explain how things work." She gestured at the reports. "We don't have missing money. We just have reallocated money." Jessica's stomach twisted. "That's not reallocation," she shot back. "That's fraud." Melissa leaned back in her chair. "That's strategy." Jessica felt the room tilt. "You mean David knows?" Melissa laughed. "Of course not. He's too busy being a celebrity. He trusts us to make the hard choices." Jessica couldn't believe what she was hearing. "This money was meant for kids," she snapped. "Single parents. Families who need help." Melissa's expression hardened. "This foundation is a business, Jessica. Money comes in, money goes out. If you want to survive here, you need to understand that." Jessica clenched her fists. "I won't be part of this." Melissa's lips curled into a smirk. "I figured you'd say that." She slid a different folder across the desk. Jessica opened it, and felt the blood drain from her face. Inside was a falsified paper trail. In her name. Transfers. Approvals. Payments. All leading back to her. Her voice came out in a whisper. "What did you do?" Melissa folded her arms. "I covered my tracks. And I made sure you were the only person left holding the bag." Jessica's pulse roared in her ears. If she went public with this, they would pin everything on her. She would lose everything. Her job? Her reputation? Her daughter's future? Melissa stood, adjusting her blazer. "I'd rethink that whole I won't be part of this thing." She walked to the door, opening it for Jessica. After all, who's going to believe the word of a former waitress over a respected financial director? Jessica's hands trembled as she picked up the folder. She had just walked into a trap. And now? She had no way out. This is the story's highest point of tension. Jessica is backed into a corner, betrayed, and facing complete ruin. But she finds an unexpected ally and makes a desperate move to fight back. Jessica walked out of Melissa's office in a daze, gripping the folder like it was a ticking time bomb. She could barely hear the buzz of the office around her, phones ringing, keyboards clacking, people laughing in the break room, as if nothing was wrong. But everything was wrong. Melissa had set her up. And if she went to the board with her findings, she'd be the one taking the fall. Jessica needed a plan. Fast. She turned a corner, nearly colliding with Patricia, David Johnson's assistant. "Whoa." Patricia steadied her. "Jessica, are you okay? You look like you just saw a ghost." Jessica hesitated. Could she trust Patricia? Before she could answer, her phone buzzed. A blocked number. She answered cautiously. "Hello?" A disguised voice came through the line. "If you want proof, check the file room, 3rd floor, storage closet 3B. Click." The call ended. Jessica's heart pounded. Who was that? And more importantly, what proof were they talking about? A race against time. Jessica knew she had to move fast. If Melissa had framed her once, she wouldn't hesitate to erase any remaining evidence. She ducked into the stairwell, taking the steps 2 at a time. When she reached storage closet 3B, her hands shook as she tried the doorknob. Locked. She glanced around. The hallway was empty. "Think, Jess. Think." She spotted a cleaning cart nearby, filled with janitorial supplies. A second later, she grabbed a metal paperclip, bending it the way she'd seen people do in movies. It was stupid. Desperate. But after a few shaky attempts, the lock clicked open. Jessica slipped inside, closing the door behind her. The room was cold and dusty, filled with old filing cabinets. She pulled open drawers at random, scanning for anything that could prove she wasn't the thief. Then, she found it. A hidden folder labeled Reallocations, Confidential. Jessica flipped through it, her breath catching. It contained the real paper trail. Transfers. Payments. Fake invoices. All approved by Melissa Grant. And at the bottom, a signature that wasn't hers, but had been forged in her name. Jessica swayed on her feet. She had everything she needed to expose Melissa. But before she could think about what to do next, she heard it. Footsteps. Right outside the door. Caught in the act. Jessica froze. The doorknob twisted. Someone's coming in. With no time to react, she did the only thing she could. She dove behind a row of filing cabinets, clutching the folder against her chest. The door creaked open. She heard heels clicking against the floor. Then, a familiar voice. "Melissa." She was talking to someone else. "She's getting too close," Melissa muttered. "We need to move everything now." Jessica's pulse skyrocketed. The other person, a man's voice, spoke up. "What about her?" "She won't be a problem much longer," Melissa said coldly. Jessica pressed a hand over her mouth. Melissa wasn't just covering her tracks. She was about to take Jessica down for good. An unlikely ally. As soon as Melissa and her accomplice left, Jessica sprinted out of the file room. She had less than an hour, maybe minutes, before they destroyed more evidence. She needed help. And there was only one person who might listen. David Johnson. But he was still out of town. Which meant Jessica's next best option was someone she wasn't sure she could trust. Patricia. She burst into the assistant's office, locking the door behind her. "Jessica?" Patricia looked up, startled. Jessica threw the folder onto her desk. "I need your help." Patricia skimmed the papers, then went dead silent. Jessica's stomach twisted. Then, Patricia looked up. Her face was unreadable. "How did you get these?" Jessica took a shaky breath. "Doesn't matter. What matters is, Melissa is setting me up." Patricia stared at the documents for a long moment. Then, she stood. "Come with me." Jessica hesitated. "Where?" To find the only person who can fix this. Jessica's pulse raced. Was Patricia on her side? Or was she walking into another trap? She had no choice but to find out. Because time was running out. And if she didn't stop this now, she was going to lose everything. This is the story's darkest moment. Jessica is on the verge of exposing the truth, but things take a devastating turn, putting everything she cares about at risk. Jessica followed Patricia through the sleek, glass-walled hallways of the Johnson Youth Foundation headquarters, her heart pounding in her chest. She was holding the truth, proof that Melissa Grant was stealing from the foundation and framing her for it. But she also knew one thing for certain: Melissa wouldn't go down without a fight. As they reached the elevator, Jessica couldn't shake the uneasy feeling crawling up her spine. "Who exactly are we going to see?" she asked, gripping the folder tighter. Patricia hesitated for the briefest second before answering. "Someone who can protect you." The elevator doors slid shut. Jessica's gut twisted. Something felt off. A trap springs shut. The elevator stopped at the top floor, where only senior executives and board members had access. Jessica stepped out cautiously. To her surprise, Patricia led her not to an office, but to a conference room. Inside, sitting at the long polished table, was Melissa Grant. And next to her, Jessica's breath caught. David Johnson. He was back. His expression was unreadable as he glanced between Melissa and Jessica. Jessica instinctively stepped back, but Patricia closed the door behind her. Locked it. Jessica's stomach plummeted. This wasn't a rescue. This was an ambush. Melissa leaned back in her chair, arms crossed. Well. You've been busy." Jessica swallowed the rising panic. She turned to David. "I have proof," she said quickly, placing the folder on the table. "Melissa has been stealing from the foundation. She forged my name on financial documents to cover her tracks." David didn't look at the folder. Instead, he sighed, like a man who had already made up his mind. And then, he slid something across the table. Jessica's blood ran cold. It was a termination letter, with her name on it. Effective immediately. Jessica shook her head, her heart pounding. "What? No. You don't understand. She's lying." David finally spoke. His voice was calm, but disappointed. "Jessica. I trusted you." The words cut deeper than she expected. Jessica froze. Melissa's smug smirk made her want to scream. "This is how it works," Melissa said smoothly. "You don't belong in this world. You never did." Jessica's hands trembled. David turned to her, his gaze sharp. "Tell me the truth, did you leak confidential financial information to outside sources?" Jessica's mouth went dry. "What? No. I would never." Melissa placed her own folder on the table. Inside were emails. Emails that looked like they had been sent from Jessica's account to journalists and rival organizations. Emails leaking sensitive foundation data. Jessica's head spun. She hadn't sent those. But now, it didn't matter. Melissa had planted the evidence. And David believed her. Jessica's vision blurred. They were destroying her. Her job? Her reputation. Her daughter's future. David stood. "Security will escort you out." Jessica's body went numb. Her legs wouldn't move. Melissa leaned forward, lowering her voice so only Jessica could hear. "You should have stayed in your lane." Jessica clenched her fists so tightly her nails cut into her palms. She had lost. She had played by the rules, tried to do the right thing. And it had cost her everything. The door opened, and two security guards entered. Jessica had no choice. She picked up her folder, the only real proof she had, and walked out of the office, her head held high. But inside, she was falling apart. The darkest night. Jessica drove aimlessly, not sure where to go. She finally pulled into a quiet, empty parking lot and gripped the steering wheel with shaking hands. Her phone buzzed. It was Ava. "Can't wait to show you my new 3-point shot tonight. Love you, Mom." Jessica squeezed her eyes shut as tears spilled over. She had fought so hard for Ava. For this job. For a better life. And now? She had nothing. No income. No credibility. And worst of all, no idea how to fix it. For the first time since this nightmare started, she truly didn't know what to do. This is the final resolution. Jessica fights back, exposes the truth, and reclaims everything she lost. The ending delivers justice, a powerful lesson, and an emotional payoff. Jessica sat in her car, gripping the steering wheel so tightly her knuckles turned white. She had lost everything. Her job? Her reputation. Her chance at giving Ava the future she deserved. And the worst part? Melissa won. Jessica felt the rage build inside her. No. She refused to accept this. Melissa thought she could bury the truth. But Jessica still had one thing left. The real evidence. She wiped her tears and made a decision. She was going to fight back. The unlikely ally. Jessica drove to the last person she ever expected to ask for help. Maria. Her old co-worker from Benny's diner. Maria opened the door, surprised. Jess? Jessica held up the folder. I need you to help me expose the biggest scandal in this city. Maria's eyes widened. But she didn't hesitate. Come in. Jessica laid everything out, the fake emails, the forged signatures, how Melissa framed her. Maria's face hardened. That woman thinks she's untouchable, Maria muttered. But you're not going down without a fight. Jessica exhaled shakily. But how? David Johnson won't listen to me. Maria smirked. Then we make sure he listens. She grabbed her laptop and pulled up a live streaming platform. Jessica's stomach flipped. You want to go public? Maria nodded. You think the media won't eat this up? You're a single mom, framed for fraud, trying to expose corruption at one of the biggest youth foundations in the country? Jessica hesitated. If she did this, there was no turning back. She looked at her phone. Ava had just sent another message. Mama, I know you're busy, but I love you so much. Jessica took a deep breath. I'm doing this for you, baby girl. She nodded. Let's do it. Going public. Maria set up the camera. Jessica sat in front of the screen, hard hammering. Hi, my name is Jessica Carter, she began, her voice shaking. She held up the forged documents. I used to work for the Johnson Youth Foundation. 2 weeks ago, I discovered that one of its senior directors, Melissa Grant, was stealing from the programs meant for kids. Maria pressed a button. Documents flashed on screen. Emails. Signatures. The undeniable truth. She framed me to cover it up, Jessica continued. And when I tried to speak out, they fired me. Her hands clenched. I'm asking for help, she said, looking directly into the camera. The board won't listen to me. But maybe if enough people see this, they'll have no choice. Maria hit post. And then, they waited. The viral firestorm. At first, nothing happened. Then, Jessica's phone exploded. Notifications flooded in. Tens of thousands of views. Then hundreds of thousands. Then, millions. Hashtag Justice for Jessica was trending. Celebrities. Parents. Journalists. Everyone was talking about it. And then, Jessica's phone rang. Unknown caller. She answered cautiously. A deep voice came through the line. Jessica, it's David Johnson. We need to talk. Now. The final showdown. Jessica arrived at the Johnson Youth Foundation headquarters one last time. This time, she wasn't alone. News reporters. Cameras. Protesters. The whole city was watching. David met her in the boardroom. Melissa was already there, looking calm. But Jessica saw the panic in her eyes. David held up his phone. Is there anything you'd like to say before we continue? Melissa forced a smile. Jessica is clearly confused. She's been through a lot, and... Jessica slammed the folder onto the table. Stop lying. She turned to David. You trusted her. And she stole from you. David flipped through the files, his jaw tightening. Jessica could see the moment it all clicked. David's expression darkened. He turned to Melissa. Is this true? Melissa opened her mouth, then closed it. The board members were already murmuring. Jessica crossed her arms. This is the part where you get fired. Melissa's face twisted with rage, but before she could say another word, security walked in. Miss Grant, one of them said, you need to come with us. Melissa's eyes widened in shock. You can't be serious. David cut her off. Get her out of my sight. Melissa screamed in frustration as security escorted her out. Jessica exhaled, her hands shaking. She had won. Redemption and a new beginning. David sat back, watching Jessica carefully. I was wrong about you, he admitted. And I owe you an apology. Jessica wasn't sure what to say. Then, David slid a different folder across the table. Jessica's heart stopped. It was a new contract. Same position. Higher salary. She swallowed hard. You want me to come back? David nodded. The kids need someone who actually cares. Jessica blinked away unexpected tears. And Ava? She asked softly. David smiled. She's already enrolled. Free of charge. Jessica let out a shaky laugh. She picked up the pen, and signed. The final moment. 1 week later, Jessica stood inside the brand new Johnson Youth Training Center. The first thing she did? She walked onto the court and found Ava. Her daughter was practicing free throws. Jessica watched as Ava sank a perfect shot. She ran over, grinning. Mom. Did you see? Jessica pulled her into a tight hug. I saw, baby. She smiled. And I am so proud of you." The whistle blew, and Ava ran back onto the court. Jessica turned, taking in the sight of kids playing, laughing, dreaming. For the first time in her life, she wasn't just surviving. She was where she was meant to be, helping kids, helping families, and proving that kindness always wins, no matter what. The end. Life lessons from Jessica's story, applying it to the real world. Jessica's journey is more than just a dramatic underdog story, it reflects real struggles that many face today: workplace corruption, injustice, self-doubt, and the fight to be heard. Her story carries powerful lessons we can all apply to our own lives. Small blue diamond, integrity always wins. In a world where shortcuts and deceit often seem like the easier path, Jessica's story reminds us that doing the right thing, even when it costs us, will always lead to something greater. Character matters more than credentials. Small blue diamond, never let others define your worth. Jessica was underestimated because of her background. But titles don't define intelligence or capability. Your potential is not dictated by your past, it's shaped by your actions. Small blue diamond, stand up for yourself and others. The system tried to silence Jessica, but she refused to back down. Whether in your workplace, community, or personal life, speak up when something isn't right. Change only happens when people are brave enough to demand it. Small blue diamond, your setbacks are your setup for a comeback. Losing her job felt like the worst moment of Jessica's life, but it led her to something greater. Sometimes what seems like an ending is actually the beginning of something bigger. No matter where you are in life, keep pushing, keep believing, and keep choosing kindness. It always comes back in ways you never expect. Blue heart.